Nathan always prided himself on being a practical man. He wasn't one to believe in superstitions, ghost stories, or anything that could be classified as irrational. But that was before he moved into the old farmhouse on the outskirts of town. The farmhouse had been abandoned for years, but Nathan saw potential in it. It was spacious, tucked away from the bustle of the city, and reasonably priced. He had no problem with its age or the odd creaks of the floorboards. In fact, he found it charming. The house had character, and he could see himself enjoying the peaceful life there. The first few nights were fine. He settled into a routine, early mornings with a cup of coffee on the porch, long evenings spent working on his computer, and late nights curled up with a book. The only thing that struck him as odd was the corner of the living room. It was just a corner, but no matter where Nathan sat, he couldn't help but notice how dark that corner seemed. It wasn't particularly shadowy or out of place, but it felt wrong, like something was always lurking there, watching him, waiting. Nathan dismissed it as nothing more than his mind playing tricks. It was an old house after all. Old houses had their quirks. But then, one night, it happened. He had just finished his work and was preparing to head to bed when he noticed the strange sensation again. The one that started in his gut and crawled up his spine, telling him he wasn't alone. He froze, trying to shake off the feeling. He glanced at the corner, but this time something was different. The darkness in the corner seemed deeper, thicker than before, almost as if it were breathing. Nathan chuckled nervously, rationalizing it as fatigue, but then he saw it. A shape. It wasn't fully formed at first, just a dark figure standing motionless in the corner, but as his eyes adjusted to the dim light, the figure became clearer. A shadow, tall and thin, with elongated limbs. It didn't move, but it was unmistakably there, standing just out of the reach of the light. Nathan stood up, his heart racing. He took a few tentative steps toward the corner, his footsteps echoing in the silence of the house. He reached out, his hand trembling, and flicked on the light. The corner was empty, no shadow, no figure, just a normal, quiet corner of the room. Breathing heavily, Nathan scolded himself. It had been a long day, he thought. He was imagining things, letting his mind wander into places it shouldn't. He turned off the light and went to bed, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling that something was watching him. The next night, the shadow was back. This time it was more defined, more solid. Nathan could see it more clearly, as if it were waiting for him. Its shape was still vague, but it had a distinct humanoid form now. It stood motionless in the corner, its long, spindly arms hanging limply at its sides. Nathan's heart pounded in his chest. His instincts screamed at him to leave the house, to get out of there, but something rooted him to the spot. It was as if the shadow was controlling him, forcing him to stay. He turned the lights on again. The corner was empty. Sweat dripped down his forehead as he tried to make sense of what was happening. Was he losing his mind? Was he sleep-deprived, or was something truly wrong with the house? Over the next few days, the shadow began to appear more frequently. It would stand in that corner, sometimes during the day, sometimes at night. It would never move, just watch. Nathan could feel its gaze on him, even when he wasn't looking directly at it. The air around him would grow colder, and the weight of its presence would grow heavier with each passing moment. Desperate for answers, Nathan did some research on the house. He learned that it had once been owned by an old man named Samuel Cartwright, who had lived alone for many years before dying in the house under mysterious circumstances. The neighbors spoke of strange noises coming from the farmhouse during the night, and whispered about the shadow that was said to haunt the place, though no one had ever seen it up close. The stories chilled Nathan to his core. The shadow in the corner wasn't a figment of his imagination. It was something more, something that had been there long before he moved in. But what did it want, and why was it following him? One evening, as Nathan sat at his desk, he felt it again, the oppressive presence of the shadow. This time he couldn't ignore it. He stood up slowly, his body stiff with fear. He turned toward the corner, and for the first time he didn't look away. He stared at the shadow, willing himself to face whatever it was. The figure didn't move, it just stood there, its eyes locked on him. Nathan's breath quickened as he took a step forward, and then, as if responding to his challenge, the shadow moved. It didn't walk or crawl, it simply drifted toward him, gliding across the room, its limbs twisting unnaturally. The air grew colder, the silence deeper, until the only sound in the room was the sound of his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. The shadow reached out with one long, skeletal hand. In a panic, Nathan turned and ran. He bolted out of the room, down the stairs and into the front yard. His breath came in ragged gasps as he stood outside, staring at the farmhouse. The house looked ordinary in the daylight, but Nathan knew something was wrong. He didn't go back inside that night. For days, Nathan stayed at a friend's house, trying to gather his thoughts, trying to figure out what was happening. But when he finally returned to the farmhouse, he found it empty, silent. No shadow in the corner, no oppressive presence. The house seemed completely normal. But as he walked through the front door, he saw it, a figure standing in the same corner waiting for him. Only this time, Nathan knew what it wanted. It wanted him. The next morning, the neighbors found the farmhouse empty. Nathan's car was still parked outside, but there was no sign of him anywhere. No note, no trace. The house stood silent, the shadow in the corner waiting for its next victim. Some say the shadow still lurks there, waiting for someone new to move in. Others believe Nathan was consumed by it, trapped in that corner forever. But one thing was certain: no one dared go near the farmhouse again.